Welcome to the France 24 debate. Here in Paris, the temperatures are heading towards the high 30s Celsius. A heat wave alert is in place. While people are heading to the popular Paris plage on the banks of the Seine to try to cool down. It's not possible for everyone. The heat wave, the French word is canicule, could have serious consequences. For instance, France saw some 19,000 deaths linked to excessively hot weather back in 2003. So while people here having fun, there could be other people who are having less fun. Paris is also on a pollution alert because of the heat, making the air quality worse. Car use is being restricted by order of the City Hall. Given Paris is a place where the last major climate change accord was signed, we're taking a look at the issue once again. All around us, the evidence stacks up. In Greece, wildfires have claimed at least 81 lives. 83, according to our correspondent a little earlier. Many more people, sadly, are missing. It is a terribly tragic state of affairs. The Greek state, ruined by the financial crisis and years of austerity, has called on the EU for help. The one positive thing is that people are rallying round within that structure to try to help tackle the situation. So the response there has been laudable, but it's not yet stopped the fires burning on the coast on the outskirts of Athens. In this debate, we are asking, can the weather extremes be reversed? Will the changes we are being asked to make do the trick? And if we don't make those changes, what could happen next? Here for our debate on the climate. In the studio, we have no order of preference because all our guests are excellent. Clémence Dubois, who is campaigner at 350.org. Clémence, thank you very much for coming to see us. On the other side of our studio, Sabrina Speich, who is from the Institut Pierre-Simon Laplace, which is a climate change institute. Obviously, your specialism very much needed in this debate. And thank you for joining us too. Joining us by Skype from Bonn, we have Alexander Held, who is a senior expert at the European Forest Institute. Alexander, thanks for being with us. I'll bring you in a moment. First, let's get a look at the latest on the situation in Greece.
Volunteer groups in the Athenian suburb of Mati inspecting the damage and searching for survivors, a task which in many cases has proved to be futile. Amongst residents here, fear has transformed into anger in the aftermath of the wildfires.
They should preempt tragedies like this. We're so close to Athens here, so they need to have an evacuation plan.
Grievances which have not entirely been appeased despite the presence of the army distributing food and firefighters searching through houses.
We're here to help people so that they can eat, so that the firefighters can get through, so that electricity can be re-established, and so that the clean-up operation can get underway.
In an attempt to quell the anger of those affected by the fires, the government has announced a series of measures, including compensation. €10,000 for the loss of a relative, €5,000 for the loss of a house, as well as potential tax breaks. Fire prevention is also being drawn into question now, with uncontrolled urbanisation of particular concern.
For years, we could have better overseen construction in wooded areas, given the risk of fire. When I was young, there weren't any houses here, just pine trees. I could never have imagined that so much would be built here. And look what happened.
For the time being, though, managing the crisis is the priority. The government has deployed a psychology unit for victims and has announced the creation of a special fund open to donations.
Maria, so far so with that report, €10,000 for the loss of a relative. It seems like a piddling amount of money compared to the pain that people are going through there in Greece. And all this due to a natural disaster, which some people are saying could have been prevented if the government had acted in a better way. The Defence Secretary coming under great criticism from local people. Let's bring in our guests to talk more about the situation in the broadest senses and in the most particular senses too, because Clémence Dubois, what we're seeing in Greece is in a sense, I think, a confluence of two things. We've got the problems with climate change, but also the problems that the state is dealing with its resources being worn down, so they couldn't react quickly enough.
It's true. So first of all, I think we have to ask the question, who is responsible from those atrocious damage? And this is one side of the story that we talk really little, and there is a clear answer. It's the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry are climate criminals. They are the ones setting on fire the world, and instead of paying 10,000 for loss of a relative, we have to make them pay for the damage that are happening, but also we have to stop them because we know what needs to happen to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. It's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. We have to keep fossil fuel in the ground. But instead of that, the fossil fuel industry, with the complicity of the states, the European Union, is like digging more and more to extract more coal, more gas, more oil from the ground. This is the carbon that has to stay in the ground to avoid the worst damages. But instead of that, the government is helping them to dig more. Even in Greece, there is a new project of gas that is pumping gas from Azerbaijan to Europe. And just this project will not enable Europe to respect its climate commitments. So at this stage, we have to know who we are protecting. Are we protecting the fossil fuel industries, which is making a lot of profit from this, or are we protecting the citizens? For years, the most impacted, the most vulnerable communities around the world have been impacted by dramatic heat waves, floods, droughts that have caused huge hunger. But now the impacts of climate change are feeling closer to our house, and it's because it's becoming indeed worse and worse. So it's really a turning point for government really to seize the problem. It's not a matter of future generation, it's here and now, and we need them to break the status quo and take bold actions.
Clemence, a lot of what you're saying I could hear resonating with things that Donald Trump has changed since he was elected as president of the United States. And clearly those issues about favouring fossil fuel and oil, those issues, of course, are things to explore a lot closer. Sabrina, can I bring you in and talk a little bit more about the situation? Because obviously we're seeing extremes in terms of heat, we're seeing extremes in terms of cold, we're seeing typhoons. I'm thinking of people in the Philippines having their homes washed out by extreme wind and rain, and all these extremes of weather coming in. It seems more and more becoming more and more the norm of what we have to put up with across the world.
Yes, so this is something that is already well known. We know really that with global warming, this climate change, this kind of extreme events, especially heat waves, will be more dramatic and essentially more frequent.
So this is something we have to get used to.
Right. So just to give you a number, if we are good in terms of the climate agreement of Paris, we will have an enhancement of 40%. So now we are about an additional 30% compared to before. We will go to 48% if we go with the Paris Agreement, so increase and then decrease the greenhouse gases. And if we do not do anything, we will be 80% of the population of the world will be hit by heat waves. So it's really dramatic. And usually media really talk about heat waves separated from wildfire, from floods, from typhoon storms, sea level. All these are extreme events that are really taking the energy because the system is just, it has much more energy. And the fact that we think about 1 degree or 2 degree, 3 degree and a half will be probably the temperature we are going to have if we continue like that, and maybe more if we put even more greenhouse gases
and the Paris Agreement was trying to restrict that rising of the temperature to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels.
We are not following that path. We are already at 3.5. If we burn more fossil fuels, will be even more. And also when the climate is warmer, we have more humidity in the air, and the water vapor is also a greenhouse gases. So it is a positive feedback. So it will increase even more the warming.
It sounds completely like a vicious circle. Sabrina, can I pause you there and bring in from Bonn by Skype Alexander Helt, who's senior expert at the European Forest Institute. Alexander, I hope you can hear us. I'd be interested to get your take on the situation in Greece, how it's happened and what has made it worse.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Go ahead, sir.
Um, I agree with the other speakers that the underlying reason for this situation that we're facing is our behavior as society, because all our progress that we made in the last 150 years is based on oil, and that oil, all our products are based on oil, and that is fertilizers, that is clothes, that is mobile phones, everything. And this is putting too much energy into the system. And we're looking now at a situation, and now suddenly we are paying the price, and we are having these disaster fires. And the discussion that I observe as a fire manager or fire ecologist and a forester is very controversial, because if we blame the fires that we have now in Greece or in Sweden, and last year we had the same situation in Portugal, tragic situations, and we say, well, it's climate change. This is a very good excuse to do nothing, because climate change is so big and is such a global problem that me or you, in your daily life, you get away with easily away with the fact to do nothing. Because if I don't change my lifestyle and my consumerism, it won't make a difference. So climate change for me is a big risk, to say the fires that we have, oh, this is a result of climate change. Then everybody will say, all right, this is climate change, and there's not much we can do about it today. And the opposite is true. The fire situation that we observe is not different from any fire situation, be it in Australia or Africa or Latin America, places that have this kind of climate already for the past, 1,000, 2,000, 60,000 years. And now we're having these big problems and disaster fires. And this is not because of the weather only. Yes, the weather, which is a result of the changing climate, is giving us the more severe conditions to have more intense fires, but only because we don't do our homework. If you take the fire triangle, and that is explaining basically every process of combustion, it needs 3 elements. It needs oxygen, it needs enough heat to ignite the 3rd element in the triangle, and that is fuel. So if we look at wildfires, and it doesn't matter where in the world, oxygen in a wildfire situation we cannot control. There is always oxygen, and we will never be in the position to control all the sources of ignition. And maybe because of biodiversity and the natural role of fire, we shouldn't control all the sources of ignition. But even if we wanted, we wouldn't. So we are left with one element that we have to manage, and this is the vegetation. So if you look in the research of the past 50 years, it is very, very clear evidence that the only known way to prevent disaster fires with climate change or without climate change is managing the fuel, which means managing the vegetation. And now this can be done because we're modifying and managing the vegetation everywhere on this globe. But now, especially in Europe, we say, oh, no, what do you mean managing the vegetation? We can't do this. The area is too big. There are too many landowners. There's too much smoke if you go prescribed burning, for example. So there's a lot of reasons why you can't do it.
Alexander, can I pause you? Can I pause you? Because the guests here would like to, I think, raise some questions on what you are saying there. Starting with Clémence, what would you like to say? Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I agree. We, of course, have to change the way we live to reduce our impact on the planet, but we don't have the same responsibility in the crisis. The fossil fuel industry has been lying for decades. If you take the example of Exxon, they knew about climate change really early, and they lied, and that's why they are sued right now. And not only were they lying, but they were fooling the politicians with millions of dollars to create this culture of climate denial that we're actually paying now. And, you know, for instance, Total, so the main in the oil industry in France, what are they doing now? They're beneficiating from the Arctic that is melting to export more gas, and they are complementing themselves that the transport takes less time because the Arctic has melted. So we indeed have to do our homework, but our homework is to stop acting as individuals. So for years, the question has been depoliticized, and we've been asked as citizens to recycle more. But actually, what we have to do is organize and build the largest movement, the largest coalition we can do to take on the fossil fuel industry. And so this is why on September the 8th, we're going to rise together as a movement to say that the science is clear and that this is enough. And so really acting as a movement and organize each other politically is doing the homework.
That's a call to action from you, Sabrina.
Okay, so I agree with our German colleague
Alexander. Yeah.
Alexander. Climate change is there, and there are also events, extremes that are coming on that were happening already, but now are happening in places where they were less frequent. And so we need an adaptation to that. And for that, I think we need to help to make understand the stakeholders, governmental, regional, city stakeholders, that we can work together, scientists, because science is able to quantify facts and help in adaptation to these extremes, to climate change in general, together with fighting against the problem, of course. But also the climate change is running really fast, so we need also to help adapt the population.
Sabrina, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. That's part one of the debate. Stay with us. More to come in part two. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. The heat wave, of course, has prompted tonight's debate, and our guests doing their best to bring us the insight into why the climate is not just the key question of the day, but the key question we don't seem to be able to find a quick solution to. Here in the studio, Clémence Dubois, campaigner at 350.org. Clémence, thank you very much for being with us. On the other side of our studio, Sabrina Spike, who is Professor of Climate Change and at the Institut Pierre Simon Laplace here in Paris. Thank you very much for being with us. Yeah. Joining us by Skype from Bonn, we have Alexander Held, who's senior expert at the European Forest Institute. Alexander, thank you for hanging on and being with us there. Let's get the latest, though, on the situation before we move on and bring on our guests.
This is usually a holiday home for disabled children. On Tuesday, 30 people sought refuge here after their homes were destroyed. The following day, 200 more arrived. Volunteers here hand out food, clothes and even mobile phones to those who've lost everything. The Greek Orthodox Church is also here, not for prayers, but for charity.
I'm not going to talk about the government. I'm here on behalf of the Church. I look after the humanitarian side of things. We Greeks help each other out.
The priests hand out envelopes containing €200 to those most in need.
They've given us some money for now, and they've also said that the state is going to give us some money later. The church gave us this cash because we've not yet got anything from the government.
The director of this holiday camp turned emergency shelter says he can still welcome more people, even as he acknowledges he has no idea when they'll be able to leave.
Aximayas Balkanada have reported there in Athens, just outside Athens, of course, where the forest fires taking place around a resort called Mati, and the damage to the forest out there is phenomenal. And, of course, the tragic element, even more so, is the loss of, at the moment, 83 lives. And that death toll, sadly, is expected to rise. Let's bring back in Alexander Held from the European Forest Institute, joining us from Bonn. Alexander, the situation in Greece, the way that the fire took hold, the way it burnt, the damages caused. What are your thoughts on that?
It is very difficult now in this very tragic situation to have an objective and neutral view, a scientific view on the situation. People lost their lives, and this makes it very emotional. But if you look at the situation, where the houses were located, basically the recipe for disaster was there. There was a lot of fuel available around the houses. There was, according to my information so far, there was literally no prevention in terms of removing fuel around the houses, creating defensible space, having buffer zones along the roads. My understanding now at the moment is that there was no real government incentive to manage the settlement in this tinder dry fuel. And now you can't tell me that if you live in Greece that you are not aware of the fire risk, because Greece is burning every year. So now turning around and blaming others or the government to be ineffective and not having enough firefighters is a very easy step, and it's very understandable. But
Alexander, are you agreeing with the Greek Defense Minister Panos Mememos, who's actually pointed the finger of blame at some residents who constructed illegal buildings in these wooden areas?
Well, I agree with that. If you're building illegally, then it's your own risk. But there were a lot of houses that were not illegal. And in general, there was no integration of the risk into the community. My understanding is there's no community engagement in creating that defensible space and managing the risk. And I think Greece traditionally relies very much on aircraft and on fire suppression. And if you look into the fire science and research, you see very clearly it's all about managing the forest or the fuel in a better way to mitigate the effects of unwanted fires. And this could have been done. It is known for decades, and it is applied in Australia and in South Africa and in America. So it can be done. The problem is that what my colleague here, Sabrina, said, the adaptation is not taking place. We keep on living our lifestyle, and we keep on keeping our oil-based lifestyle, and we're not adapting. Adapting would mean we actively engage in mitigating the risk through better land management and forest management. And this is not done. But it's not rocket science. It is. You go on the internet, you go on TV, you find all the recipes how to do it. But it's not done. The focus of fire management all over the world is 99% of the budget goes into firefighting, aircraft, helicopters, waterbombing aircraft. This is a lot of money. There's a lot of industry interest, and managing the land is not very attractive, you know.
So in terms of what's happened then, you would have called for a greater sense of preparation, of preparedness, of actually sort of making sure these things don't happen. And Sabrina, just picking up from what Alexander was saying there, and maybe coming back to what you were saying in part one, the lifestyle that we all rely on clearly has created not only the situation which has happened there, but the greater situation. As Clémence said, the burning of fossil fuel, the industrialization since 1750 or whenever it all began, has created what is happening today. And of course, being reinforced by developing nations who want to have the same crack at the riches, the same crack at development. And they say, yeah, well, we wanted to burn the fossil fuels too to get ahead because we've got them in abundance and we can do that.
Right, because they are probably they are not understanding that is not a problem that human society is able to really solve with some technology very quickly. So the problem of climate change, of fossil fuel burning, and all the greenhouse gases that have been gone into the atmosphere is something that really it is so huge that we need to stop now to have an energy transition really in the coming 10 years, because otherwise we will have a very, very tough situation for the human society. So the planet will be there, but the humans is a question.
So when Angela Merkel says they're going to basically put the German nuclear park out of the window, not use that at all. You'd welcome that, I take it.
You mean the nuclear?
I mean, this is a whole different sort of Pandora's box we open.
Right, of course. France is doing better now because they have the nuclear energy. But probably we need to consecrate much more money in studying alternative energy. So
wind farms
in the ocean and in land.
Hydroelectric dams.
Yes, there are a lot of solutions. One time I was in a plane with some people from some engineer from Volkswagen. They said that there is a lot of there are many projects out there that will use electricity instead of fossil fuel, but just they are not meant to be developed.
Hydroelectric dam in Laos has just burst, 26 people at least killed. South Korean construction. I mean, people across the world are cooperating, and even then it can go wrong. It's right. I suppose that's just life, isn't it?
Right, but I think governments are not doing much, and I think government has the keys. Because people can always react, but we are educated people, but there are many people that are not even in touch with the information.
Why do we let the governments get away with it then, Clémence? Why do we let the governments not act? Because I think Sabrina's right. I think there's an issue there that the governments aren't doing the right things, and we, as voters, surely we should be telling them, this is what we want, this is what we demand.
So the demands are clear, and the climate movement in general have tried to hold government accountable for years. So, you know, at the end of COP21, there was one message from the climate coalition. It was, it's up to us now to keep it in the ground, because we know that this agreement would not be self-enforcing, and that what the government is agreeing in an international agreement wouldn't be enough, because oil and gas companies still have the ears of the governments, while the most impacted people are silenced. So again, why the transition is not happening? We know what are the solutions, but it's not happening because we have to follow the money. Where is the money going? It's going to the fossil fuel industry, to the fossil fuel projects, instead of developing aggressively, rapidly, the 100% renewable energy goals.
And I think, like you're saying, these groups have great lobbies which can talk to politicians, can sort of put their case forward, whereas the environmental groups don't have that kind of power, do they, really? I mean, there've been one or two politicians that are sympathetic, but it's not the same kind of reach as these energy giants have, is it? It's not the same kind of influence.
I think politicians, of course, are thinking on the short run. And on the short run, they saw that their interest to make the society work was to protect those interests. But it's coming clearer and clearer that the people won't stand it anymore, because it's affecting our health, it's affecting our, of course, communities, it's affecting everything that we love in the society, everything that we care about. And so when you end up with the government saying, here are $10,000 for the loss of your mother, your son, how people are actually rising around the world. The climate movement has managed to have 800 institutions divesting from fossil fuel. What does that mean? It's not just taking assets away from the fossil fuel industry, but it's a clear political gesture that says we don't want to have ties with the fossil fuel industry because what they are doing is immoral and it doesn't make any financial sense anymore, at least. And so we keep on pushing for those solutions.
And of course, one politician that would go completely against what you're saying is Donald Trump, who views completely the opposite. And I think that's supported by many others.
Not the only one. And
no,
even,
he's not. He's
even,
not, indeed.
And even those that are
I'm trying to play devil's advocate a bit, you know.
But even those that are saying that are doing something, they are not doing much.
Can I talk about Emmanuel Macron?
You can, go ahead.
So, for instance, Emmanuel Macron is championing climate on the international scene. So, for instance, in December, he invited people to join the Climate Finance Summit and introduce himself as a pioneer. But if you look at where the public money is going, so we released a report showing that actually France is funding with public money, so our money, 12 new projects of fossil fuel industry. And so those 12 projects, they are carbon bombs. And we should care about that. So now it's really time to put your action where your mouth is. And that's clearly, indeed...
Macron is really marketing himself. He's not doing much.
Seriously. Okay, well, there we go. Emmanuel Macron dealt with them. Let's bring in Alexander again from the European Forest Institute. Alexander, I hope you can hear us. I was going to ask you about the situation in Sweden, because many of us here find it really shocking that such fires, wildfires, can be going on basically in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah. Allow me a minute before we go to Sweden. If I listen to Clémence talking about the oil industry, it reminds me of talking about the tobacco industry and saying the tobacco industry is lying to me and I didn't know that smoking is not healthy. So it's not the industry. I think it's our own behavior and our own lifestyle. And if we get public funding, Sabrina, I agree with you. We get public funding, for example, at research institutes, and we produce reports and we show the results, and we try to convince policymakers to develop better governance. Obviously, all our efforts, if you look back the last 30, 40 years, we talked about forest dieback and environment pollution and everything. Nothing has changed. So our way of communication is wrong. We need to communicate in a totally different way, and we need to learn that, especially as scientists.
Alexander,
Sweden,
I think your example about
Sweden is maybe a very good opportunity.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I thought your example about the tobacco industry was unfortunate, because the tobacco industry did, in fact, lie for many years, hiding it from people that, smoking caused cancer. Clémence wants to come back on something you said, that I'll bring you back in to talk about Sweden. Bear with me, sir. Clémence.
Yes.
Yeah, and the tobacco industry is a really good example, actually, because when it was clear to the public opinion that they were lying and lobbying so hard, with advertising, then they were seen as the black sheep, and the health organization, World Health Organization, started to put them aside from the negotiations. But what we're seeing now is the fossil fuel industry being invited to the table of the negotiation. So this is why I really can't stand to hear that it's the people and the lifestyle of the people, because what do the people want? We want to breathe a clean air. We want 100% renewable energy. We want to be able to have climate justice around the world, and we have the means to do that. And are we responsible, for instance, for Total to develop their biggest project is a gas project in the Arctic, in the melting Arctic? Are we responsible for that?
No.
Thank
you. In a word, no. Alexander, Sweden, sir, tell us about Sweden.
So Sweden is burning, and is burning to a large extent, multiple fires over days, which is absolutely unusual. And for the general public, it's absolutely unusual. The experts, the specialists, and the scientists have predicted this, and nobody did listen. And now it's happening, and the UK is burning more than ever before. Ireland is burning more than ever before. It was predicted. Nobody listened. And now it's a reaction, the typical reaction. We call for international assistance, we send planes, and we put the fire out. And once the first rain arrives, we go back to our normal life and return to normal as quick as possible. And I'm coming back to our communication skills. I think we communicate wrong, because if we knew that this will happen in the Arctic Circle in Sweden, why did we not communicate it in the right way? Why was it not received? It was information out there, but it wasn't translated into action.
Again, a failure to act. Alexander, can I pause you and bring in Sabrina, who wants to comment on something you've just said? I'm sorry, let me stop you, Alexander. I'm really sorry about the delay as well. It's hard to sort of govern this, but you're doing great. Thank you, sir, for bearing with us. Sabrina.
Yes, I have two things. First of all, as Alexander say, as Alexander say, the global temperature is rising, but actually it's not rising equally everywhere. And the more you go to the north, you have a higher anomaly in terms of temperature. So the Arctic is warming like crazy. And also, I have another problem. Well, Alexander said that we need to react. For sure, we educated people, we need to react. As a scientist, we need to talk more, communicate better. But I think it's not really just our role, but it's also the role of
what we're seeing there's the global
media.
average temperature rising since the 1960s. So in my lifetime, it's gone up that much, which I find very scary.
We have already had 1 degree globally from the developing industry era. And so in less than 100 years, we are going to have...
Is that happening? Because, as Alexander points out, I mean, I'm sure this is part of it. There's a lack of communication and a lack of management of these situations. Or is it, as Clément says, it's about basically the energy industries, the dirty energy industries,
money.
making more mess, making more dirt, and creating greater problems.
Just interest of money. The classical
money
economy,
is the root of all evil.
Classical
basically.
economy say your country is doing well if you have a lot of money.
And that's what Donald Trump would say.
Right, but now there have been many economies that show that there can be another...
Does Emmanuel Macron agree with that, do you think?
Well, Macron says yes, but instead is not doing the thing he's saying he will do. So he's not pushing really for alternative energies, is really going a little bit classical and saying that he's doing something. But
let me grab a final word from Alexander before we end the programme. Alexander, what would be, very, very, very quickly now, your solution, your way of somehow solving this, Alexander, if you're still there? Can you give us in 10 seconds how you would get towards solving all of this?
Yeah, decisions to manage the land to prevent disaster fires must be independent from political systems. Politicians are elected every 4 years. They have no interest in a 20, 50-year project. So we need to manage our land in a long-term perspective sustainably and close to nature with forestry, which can contribute a lot to mitigating climate change.
That sounds very sensible. Alexander Help, thank you very much indeed. Alexander Help from the European Forest Institute joining us from Bonn. Thanks to my 2 guests in the studio, Clémence Dubois and Sabrina Speck. And it's now time for more on this in Media Watch.
Thank you.
We welcome Emma James.
Hi there.
Emma James, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you.
Tell us what you found on this issue.
Well, right here, right now in France, we are, of course, suffering from a heat wave. And the word that everyone needs to learn, if they don't already speak French, is canicule, which means heat wave. Lots of people taking to Twitter talking about, because it's been such a sustained period of exceptionally hot temperatures. So we're getting things like this. World is lava, tweets this gentleman, and you just see a hand disappearing into the molten lava, because it is starting to feel a little bit like that right now. This Twitter user has a gentleman wishing us all a good heat wave, and that's somebody spraying liberal amounts of deodorant. Hopefully everyone is taking heed of that, although the same man actually tweeted this a little later, so maybe not. He says, I'm sweating on the metro, it's not mine.
A lot of people have been relating this kind of story about travelling in on the metro and it being rather, well, can we say, rank?
Yeah. It's not a pleasant experience at all. If you've got an air-conditioned car, it's a much better way to get around right now, although not very environmentally friendly, of course, especially if you're driving around alone. Other people saying it's astounding how many French people complain about getting sick from being around air conditioning.
That is a constant cry in our offices, isn't it?
Absolutely.
People sick about air conditioning.
Very, very regular. I read a piece on this the other day. And it is interesting as well, because here in France, we've kind of reached a peak of electricity consumption, and it's because of all the fans and all the air conditioning. So, yes, there are lots and lots of repercussions of this very extended heat wave that we have. Some people are tweeting images like this, showing how people People are actually taking to the banks of the Seine to escape their overheated apartments. This was Paris last night, just before midnight, would you believe? Some people appear to be actually bedding down rather than trying to sleep inside right now, because basically this country and Paris is just not set up for this kind of heat. This is how they were getting through it back in 1921, apparently. It's always nice to see these kind of archive shots. But it's always interesting as well that somebody will always say, oh, well, you see, that proves the point. We had hot days, we had hot summers in days of yore. That means it's not climate change, it's just normal. But even Britain's The Sun newspaper appears to have got on board, or at least they did yesterday. The world is on fire, they say, because of course it's not just France and it's not just Britain. Heat waves and wildfires in Greece, in Japan, and of course hundreds of people dead as a result of this. The Sun has always had a very climate change sceptic viewpoint, and people were quite surprised by this front page. It's basically this from the Met Office illustrates just how much of Europe is being affected by the jet stream being much further north than normal.
That is insane, isn't it?
It absolutely is. However, it is the Met Office that was targeted in The Sun just the next day after that front page that seemed to make people think maybe they didn't question climate change anymore. Rod Liddle writing this opinion piece saying that the Met Office, who have issued warnings to people to stay inside in these hot temperatures, saying they can stick that advice where the sun doesn't shine.
He's got away with words, hasn't he?
He has. It's a really revolting piece, a very good example of a very sexist middle-aged mind, I have to say. But basically what it boils down to, he says he's not a denier of climate change, but the hot summers are great, and if we blame global warming for the cooler weather that we have too in winter, well, you can't have it both ways. It's a very simplistic and disproven
hot
point
summers
of view.
can be great if you're geared up to cope with those hot summers, but if you're not, it's an absolute nightmare.
I think it boils down to the fact that he likes the hot summers because women don't wear so many clothes. That's the point of this article.
That's what I was driving at.
Yes, absolutely. The Daily Mail has gone with this front page. Again, they are very climate change sceptical. Furnace Friday, they say, and then inside you have yet another article that says basically it's just a heat wave. Get over it. This isn't a question of global warming. This writer, Christopher Booker, says that we should ignore the experts and look at some proper historical evidence. And according to him, the Paris Climate Agreement was little more than an empty charade, and we're always going to have abnormally hot summers from time to time.
Christopher Booker, eh?
Yes, okay. Indeed. A well-known voice on this particular topic. There is obviously far more sensible reporting out there, nuanced reporting, if you like. The New York Times has a series of articles right now talking about climate change. This in Lebanon, a really beautiful photo essay that's well worth taking a look at. Details the threat to Lebanon's cedar trees, which was actually made a UNESCO World Heritage Site 20 years ago. But UNESCO now says it's one of the most vulnerable sites, most vulnerable to climate change, that is actually has that honour, as it were. There used to be thousands of square metres of these cedar trees. They are now down to just 17 square metres. So it is a huge, huge difference. And you can see that the images really are quite stunning. Another place that they talk about, which has already felt the pinch of climate change, the Solomon Islands. This is a really interesting piece. Talks about how one island has already been lost, as they put it, drowned by heaving currents and rising seas. There are 3 remaining, but they say in this article, life here is lovely, tropical and calm, but also akin to living in a bathtub with warm water pouring in and no drain to let it out ever.
And that is quite an image. Emma, thank you very much indeed for that look online on the issue of our debate, climate change. Thanks to Clémence Dubois of 350.org. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to Sabrina Speck of the Institut Pierre-Simon Laplace. And thank you to Alexander Helt joining us from the European Forest Institute. And thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us here. You're watching France 24.